40 minutes. That was the only thing standing between Iran's southern coast and the first impacts. 40 minutes of open water. 40 minutes of radar screens that still looked calm. 40 minutes before the largest American military operation since the 2003 invasion of Iraq would announce itself in fire. At 7:10 local time, the first signal wasn't a siren in Tehran. It was a hatch slamming open on the deck of the USS Spruant. A Tomahawk cruise missile erupted from its vertical launch cell, its booster igniting in a violent flash before separating seconds later. A turbofan engine the size of a coffee table spooled to life, and the missile leveled out, dropping to just 50 feet above the waterline. 4 seconds later, another cell fired. Then another. Then another. Within 90 seconds, 8 Tomahawks were airborne. 300 meters northwest, 2 additional destroyers were executing the same sequence. 25 cruise missiles now skimmed the surface of the Gulf, radar altimeters tracing the wave tops at 550 miles per hour. Their routes weren't random. They were threaded carefully between Iranian coastal surveillance stations, exploiting every known coverage gap. Flight time to IRGC naval bases along Iran's southern coast, 40 minutes. Onshore, nothing moved. Somewhere on the Gulf Coast, an Iranian radar operator was likely watching a blank scope. He had about 39 minutes of peace left, but Tomahawks are slow by design. That 550 miles per hour meant exposure. A single coastal radar ping could compromise the entire southern strike. Everything depended on what had already crossed into Iranian airspace. Ahead of the cruise missiles, something far cheaper was already at work. Inside Iranian airspace, a wave of Lucas drones pushed inland at barely 110 knots. On the scope of a Bavar 373 air defense battery, they appeared as a dozen slow-moving contacts materializing from the coast. The operator couldn't tell which carried 40-pound warheads aimed directly at his radar antenna and which were just noise. Training left him one option. He fired. The interceptor streaked off the rail, costing over $1 million. It closed at 3 times the speed of sound and obliterated a drone the size of a riding lawnmower. But it wasn't a Tomahawk. It was a low-cost unmanned combat attack system, Lucas, operated by Task Force Scorpion Strike. Manufactured by Spectral Works in Mesa, Arizona, reverse-engineered from captured Iranian Shahid 136s, each one cost roughly $35,000 to produce. And right now, they were the most important aircraft over Iran. The operator fired again. Another $1 million interceptor. Then again. This was cost-exchange warfare at industrial scale. Every interceptor chasing a drone cheaper than a pickup truck meant one fewer missile in the magazine when 25 Tomahawks arrived in 30 minutes. Worse, every time that battery fired, it revealed itself. The moment an interceptor launched, the radar broadcast its exact position. Passive sensors aboard F-35s crossing the Iraqi border were already cataloging those emissions. The operator wasn't just spending ammunition. He was painting a target on his own forehead. Iranian air defense commanders may have celebrated the kills. They shouldn't have. The interceptors they were burning through were going to be desperately needed in about 25 minutes. Because what crossed the Iraqi border next wasn't a $35,000 drone. For 90 minutes, 12 F-15I ROMs had been climbing east through Iraqi airspace. In front of them, F-35I Adirs fighters flew silent, electronic warfare suites, cataloging every radar emission along the Iranian border while transmitting nothing. The ROMs stayed in their electromagnetic shadow. Each F-15I carried a Rampage missile slung beneath the fuselage centerline. At 8:05 local time, the formation reached launch altitude over western Iraq. In the back seat of the lead aircraft, the weapons officer watched his targeting display update. Coordinates had been refined 3 times via Link 16 from an Israeli Oran intelligence aircraft circling over Jordan. Final solution confirmed. The pilot squeezed the release. 2,500 pounds dropped away. The jet lurched as weight disappeared. Below, the missile's solid rocket motor ignited, punching through the sound barrier within seconds. It climbed on a ballistic arc toward Tehran, its exhaust plume shrinking in the pilot's rearview mirrors. 11 more Rampage missiles launched in rapid succession. 12 weapons now arced east, accelerating beyond anything Iran could intercept at this stage of flight. A Tomahawk launch from Iraq would take 45 minutes to reach Tehran. These needed minutes. That difference, minutes versus 45, was the entire game. 45 minutes gives radar operators time to detect, track, request authorization, and fire. Minutes give them time to watch the impact on the news. Spent rocket boosters would tumble into fields across eastern Iraq. Analysts in Austin would photograph them within hours. But right now, 12 warheads were converging on Pasteur Street. Meanwhile, the Tomahawks were 10 minutes from the Gulf Coast. The air defense batteries that had been firing at Lucas drones all morning were running out of interceptors. At 8:10, the timeline collapsed. Everything arrived at once. The standoff weapons hit first. Supersonic warheads slammed into the office of the Supreme Leader on Pasteur Street with almost no warning. Multiple direct hits reduced buildings inside the compound to broken concrete. Smoke columns punched into the morning air. An Airbus satellite passing overhead captured the aftermath within minutes, and that was only the opening strike. Because as smoke rose over Tehran, a new wave was already crossing the border, carrying bombs, not missiles, and the air defense system Iran had spent 30 years building was about to face its real test. The first explosions over Pasteur Street were not the end of the strike. They were the signal. Within minutes of the Rampage impacts, the F-35I Adirs fighters that had been holding just outside Iranian airspace crossed the border carrying JDAMs and GBU-39 small-diameter bombs. This was the phase where stealth and sensor fusion mattered more than raw speed. The pilots did not juggle radar screens or infrared feeds. The F-35's computers merged everything, its own sensors, Link 16 data from every aircraft in formation, and satellite imagery into a single integrated picture. Every active Iranian radar within roughly 200 miles, every friendly aircraft, the precise GPS coordinates of the buildings about to be struck. One display, one decision. At 25,000 feet, one F-35 rolled inverted and pulled down toward the Ministry of Defense compound. A GBU-39 small-diameter bomb dropped free. Only 250 pounds, 1/4 the size of a standard JDAM, but its diamond-shaped wings extended and it began a glide of more than 40 miles. At that range, its circular error was measured in single-digit feet. The bomb punched through the ministry's roof and detonated on a delayed fuse inside the 3rd floor, the level housing military planning documents. Across Tehran, the pattern repeated. The Ministry of Intelligence, the Atomic Energy Organization headquarters, the Parchin military complex, each target selected not for symbolism but for function. These were nodes that could not be rebuilt quickly, relocated easily, or replaced through backups. The F-35s were not hitting random government buildings. They were severing the administrative nervous system that linked Iran's military leadership to its field units, intelligence arms, and nuclear bureaucracy. But time was limited. Every minute spent over Tehran burned fuel. Every minute increased exposure. And from the mountains of western Iran, a more capable air defense system, one the Lucas drones had not yet reached, was beginning to track. 700 miles south of the smoke over Tehran, another clock ran out. At 8:12 local time, the first Tomahawk reached the Gulf Coast. The warhead slammed into the Olua IRGC Naval Base Command building. The structure folded inward. Fuel storage ignited behind it, and a column of black smoke punched into the humid morning air. 4 minutes later, an F-15E Strike Eagle from the 48th Fighter Wing, forward deployed to Jordan from RAF Lakenheath, rolled in from the north at 18,000 feet in a 60-degree dive. For 40 minutes, the weapons systems officer in the back seat had been watching a hardened concrete shelter on his APG-82 radar. a half-moon roof designed to protect PACAP-class fast attack boats inside. These were the boats Iran built to swarm the Strait of Hormuz, 50 feet long, armed with machine guns and rocket launchers, designed to sprint out in packs of 100 and overwhelm oil tankers and U.S. warships through sheer volume. He designated the shelter, confirmed GPS lock, released a GBU-31, 2,000 pounds dropped from the centerline. The JDAM tail kit deployed. 4 grid fins adjusted 10 times per second, guiding hardened steel and tritonal toward a roof built to stop shrapnel, not a weapon striking with the force of a freight car. 30 seconds of freefall. The bomb punched through the arch and detonated inside the shelter. The overpressure had nowhere to go. Walls blew outward. The roof pancaked down onto the boats like a fist closing. The Strike Eagle was already pulling 5 GS back to altitude when the WSO confirmed the hit on targeting pod footage. Below, the Strait of Hormuz sat open and quiet. Iran had spent 40 years threatening to mine it and choke the global economy. The boats meant to execute that plan were burning under a collapsed roof, and the Navy was not finished. 500 miles east, the aircraft carrier USS Abraham Lincoln drove into a headwind at 30 knots. On Catapult 1, an F-15E Super Hornet from VFA-40, 1 Black Aces sat at military power. The catapult officer dropped to one knee and touched the deck. The holdback released, 0 to 165 miles per hour in under 3 seconds. 4 GS forced the pilot into the ejection seat. The Black Aces were headed for Chabahar, Iran's only deepwater port on the Gulf of Oman. Tomahawks had already struck the command post and fuel storage 20 minutes earlier. Petroleum reserves burned visibly 60 miles out, but submarine piers still stood, and a Gadir-class submarine slipping out to sea could carry mines into the Strait of Hormuz, hiding in commercial traffic. That could not happen. The lead Hornet rolled in on the submarine pier with a GBU-31. His wingman from VFA-14 Top Hatters followed 30 seconds later with another 2,000-pounder into the adjacent dry dock facility. If you cannot fuel a submarine, repair it, or load it with mines, it becomes an expensive lawn ornament. A third pair targeted the C-802 anti-ship missile battery positioned on a coastal bluff. 2 GBU-39 small-diameter bombs later, the launcher that threatened tankers and coalition warships ceased to exist. Across the Gulf Coast, the coordinated Tomahawk then fighter pattern struck Azalea, Chabahar, and Bandar Abbas, home to Iran's Kilo-class submarines and IRGC Navy headquarters. Carrier air wings still held weapons in reserve, insurance against any IRGC boat willing to sortie. None did. But 500 miles north, over Tehran, fuel gauges were dropping, and in the western mountains, the air defense system Iran had been counting on was finally beginning to wake up. 3 hours into the operation, the weapon meant to replace Iran's destroyed S-300 batteries was about to reveal itself. And the moment it did, the next phase of the war would begin. For hours, it had been quiet. Too quiet. After Israel dismantled virtually all of Iran's Russian-supplied S-300 batteries in October 2024, Iranian engineers had spent 2 years building a domestic replacement. Under sanctions, under pressure, under constant surveillance. What they produced would later be designated by the IDF as the SA-65, a mobile phased array radar system with an engagement range of roughly 150 kilometers. It was the ceiling of what Iran could build on its own. They positioned it in the Kermanshah Mountains, guarding the western air corridor Israeli jets had been using all morning, and until now, it had remained mostly silent. An EA-18G Growler from the USS Abraham Lincoln's air wing detected the first change. The SA-65 search radar had been pulsing intermittently for hours, short, controlled bursts. Enough to attempt tracking F-35s without staying active long enough to attract a missile. Disciplined, careful, but now a second wave of Rampage missiles was inbound through that same corridor. The battery commander faced the decision every air defense operator dreads: stay hidden and let the weapons pass, or switch to fire control and take the shot. He chose to shoot. The moment the radar shifted to full-power continuous track, the battery committed itself. And in modern warfare, transmission equals vulnerability. The Growler's ALQ-249 next-generation jammer flooded the SA-65's tracking frequency with overwhelming power, turning its display into static. At the same time, an F-35I that had been passively mapping those emissions for 90 minutes transmitted precise grid coordinates via Link 16. From 40 miles west, a Super Hornet released an AGM-88 anti-radiation missile. The rocket motor ignited. The missile accelerated toward nearly Mach 3. Its multimode seeker, GPS, inertial guidance, and millimeter-wave homing did not care if the radar shut down. It already knew where the emitter lived. From emission to impact, less than 90 seconds. Iran had spent 2 years building a replacement for the air defense network Israel destroyed. The replacement was destroyed before it could fire a successful shot. A U.S. official would later state, "We have effectively suppressed their air defenses." That single sequence changed the geometry of the battlefield. For 3 hours, aircraft had orbited over western Iraq waiting for this moment, watching the air defense picture shift from red to amber. Now it turned green. 12 F-22 Raptors received the call. Jets from Joint Base Langley Eustis, Virginia. Call signs trend 51 through 66. Forward deployed to Israel via RAF Lakenheath 4 days earlier. They had spent 3 hours burning fuel over Iraq, holding position, waiting for the corridor to open. Now they pushed east. The lead Raptor advanced at military power, banking into Iranian airspace. His APG-77 radar painted everything within 125 miles, tracking contacts as small as a golf ball, while the Raptor's own radar signature remained roughly the size of a marble. An Iranian fighter would need to be within 15 miles to detect anything at all. At 15 miles, AMRAAMs are already airborne, but the Raptors were not here to dogfight. They were here to listen. The F-22's AN/ALR-94 electronic warfare suite, over 30 antennas embedded across wings, fuselage, and tail, monitored nearly every slice of the electromagnetic spectrum. As Raptors cruised over central Iran, they cataloged emissions below. A mobile SAM battery that relocated during the morning chaos. Logged and geolocated. An IRGC command post transmitting on what it believed was a secure frequency. Tagged and forwarded via Link 16 to an F-15E orbiting 60 miles behind. The Raptors fired only when necessary. Every piece of data they collected made the next strike more precise. The Iranian Air Force, approximately 40 operational MiG-29s, a handful of surviving F-14 Tomcats and aging Phantoms, remained on the ground. It was the correct choice. Because in the mountains of western Iran, a different fight was reaching its peak. While Raptors monitored central Iran and naval aviation dismantled the Gulf Coast, 30 F-15I aircraft loaded with Rafael Spice glide bombs and Delilah cruise missiles spread across Kermanshah, Lorestan, and Khuzestan provinces. Their mission, hunt transporter erector launchers, the heavy trucks capable of raising and firing Shahab-3 ballistic missiles. The math was unforgiving. An IRGC missile crew could drive a Shahab-3 from a hardened tunnel, set up in a valley, connect fuel lines, erect the missile, and launch in under 30 minutes. Then retreat underground before the next satellite pass. Israel had spent months assembling targeting packages from signals intelligence, satellite imagery, and reportedly human sources inside the IRGC. Every source was critical today. Finding a launcher in those mountains was like finding one specific food truck in New York City, except this truck could hit Tel Aviv, and it moved every 20 minutes. Hours later, IDF drone footage would show the moment that defined the hunt. A launcher caught mid-sequence in a narrow valley, infrared grainy but clear enough. The Shahab-3 already vertical, ground crew connecting the final fuel umbilicals. The weapons officer aboard an orbiting F-15I centered his crosshairs on the launcher rail. He did not release, not yet. If he dropped immediately, the spice bomb might damage the launcher but leave the missile intact. He needed the fuel lines connected. He needed the crew bunched together. He needed maximum effect. 10 seconds. 15. The ground crew stepped back from the connection point. He released. The Raphael Spice glide bomb extended its wings and steered down the valley, guided by GPS and electro-optical systems. Its trajectory calculated to strike at a shallow angle, maximizing blast across both the launcher and the missile body. 12 seconds later, it hit at the junction of the launcher rail and truck chassis. The Shahab-3 fuel tank ruptured. 3 tons of liquid propellant ignited in a secondary fireball that washed out the infrared camera for 2 full seconds. When the image returned, the valley floor was scorched bare. The launcher was scrap, but not all of them. Iran had hundreds dispersed across the western mountains, some hidden in tunnels with collapsed approaches, some decoys, some fast enough to launch before being targeted, and some of those missiles were already airborne, arcing toward Israeli cities. The only way to limit how many would get through was to destroy as much of the stockpile as possible before launch. And now, with air defenses suppressed and Raptors feeding targeting data to every aircraft in theater, the coalition scaled up. What came next would determine whether this remained a strike or became something much larger. Once the SA-65 was gone, the pace changed. What had been a carefully sequenced operation turned into full-capacity execution. With Iranian air defenses effectively suppressed and F-22s feeding real-time targeting data across the theater, Israel launched its next wave, 30 additional fighter jets fanning out across Isfahan, Bushehr, Avaz, and surrounding areas. 60 precision munitions targeted sites the opening strikes could not reach. Ballistic missile warehouses, air defense production lines, a drone regiment headquarters. The logic was simple. The first wave severed command nodes and neutralized coastal threats. The second wave attacked depth production, stockpiles, and reserve capacity. Across 3 provinces, JDAMs and GBU-39 small-diameter bombs walked methodically through depot after depot. The Shad-136 depots were among the most critical. Warehouse complexes, hardened hangars, launch racks stacked with one-way attack drones fueled, armed, and pre-programmed with coordinates for Israeli cities and American bases. The same drones Iran intended to launch in swarms of hundreds later that afternoon as retaliation. Instead, they detonated in place. 950 drones destroyed before launch. At the same time, U.S. strikes pushed deeper inland against IRGC command and control infrastructure. Underground bunkers, communications relays, fiber optic nodes. The targeting priority was consistent across the campaign. Sever communications first. Without connectivity, commanders cannot coordinate, even if assets remain intact. Within hours, Iran's internet traffic dropped to roughly 4% of normal levels, confirmed by NetBlock's monitoring. Command networks fractured, regional units isolated, but the battlefield was not clean. In the western mountains, despite dozens of successful strikes, not every transporter erector launcher had been caught. Iran had hundreds dispersed, some concealed in tunnels with collapsed entrances, some decoys. Some crews moved quickly enough, fuel connected, missile raised, launched before a spice bomb or Delilah missile could arrive. Those Shahab-3 missiles were already arcing toward Israeli cities. Some counterfire would get through. The objective was never absolute prevention. It was reduction, destroy as much conventional missile capacity as possible before launch. With Raptors still orbiting, cataloging emissions, every new radar activation or command transmission was logged and passed to trailing strike aircraft. F-15Es 60 miles behind adjusted routes, based on live electromagnetic mapping. Mobile SAM batteries that believed they had repositioned undetected were geolocated within minutes. Iran's Air Force, roughly 40 operational MiG-29s, a handful of F-14 Tomcats and aging Phantoms, remained grounded. Given the radar imbalance and the presence of stealth aircraft overhead, any attempt to sortie would have been brief. Meanwhile, naval aviation maintained pressure along the Gulf Coast. After strikes on Azalea, Chabahar, and Bandar Abbas, the IRGC Navy's fast attack infrastructure lay damaged or destroyed. Kilo-class submarine facilities were hit. Submarine piers cratered, dry docks rendered unusable. The Strait of Hormuz remained open. That mattered. For decades, Iran had threatened to mine it and choke the global economy. The Paycap-class fast attack boats designed to swarm tankers were buried under collapsed shelters. The C-802 anti-ship missile battery overlooking the water had been eliminated by GBU-39 strikes. Carrier air wings still held munitions in reserve, positioned as insurance against any IRGC vessel attempting to sortie. None did. Back over central Iran, F-22s continued to map emissions. The AN/ALR-94 suite quietly cataloged every electronic signal, mobile SAMs attempting to reposition, command posts switching frequencies, emergency communications spiking across disrupted networks. The Raptors rarely needed to fire. Their value was information. Every emitter tagged became a future target. Every mobile system identified reduced uncertainty for the next wave. By mid-operation, the pattern was clear. Tomahawks and standoff weapons opened corridors. Drones drained interceptors. Electronic warfare suppressed radars. Stealth fighters severed administrative command nodes. Strike aircraft dismantled missile infrastructure. Naval aviation neutralized maritime threats. Layer by layer. Iran had invested 30 years in building an integrated air defense network and a dispersed missile force designed to survive initial strikes. But integration requires communication. And communication had been targeted first. Underground bunkers lost external connectivity. Fiber optic lines were severed. Regional commanders operated with incomplete information. Units that believed they were receiving coordinated guidance were increasingly isolated. The operational tempo did not rely on shock alone. It relied on sequence. 40 minutes of cruise missile flight time had once looked like vulnerability. Instead, it became synchronization. By the time Tomahawk struck IRGC naval bases at 8:12, air defense interceptors had already been depleted chasing $35,000 drones. By the time F-35s released GBU-39s over Tehran, standoff weapons had already reduced warning time to minutes. By the time the SA-65 radar switched to full-power fire control, electronic warfare assets were already aligned. A mission to impact, under 90 seconds. Iran had spent 2 years replacing destroyed S-300 batteries. The replacement was eliminated before it could meaningfully engage. And once air defenses were suppressed, the operation scaled without resistance. The final indicator of strategic effect was not a single explosion. It was fragmentation. Command and control nodes severed, missile stockpiles reduced, drone depots destroyed, naval assets immobilized. Communications degraded to a fraction of normal capacity. Some Iranian counterfire launched. Some missiles arced toward Israeli cities. The mountains still hid undiscovered launchers, but the balance had shifted. An operation that began with a Tomahawk rising from the deck of USS Sprunt ended with Iran's integrated defense network fractured, its coastal strike capability crippled, and its largest conventional drone stockpile destroyed before it could launch. The message was not symbolic. It was structural. Suppress the sensors, drain the interceptors, break the links, strike the nodes, and the rest collapses. Subscribe for more military insights, tech breakdowns, and updates.